Hello, I'm Brian Seymour, writer and contributor for MonsterVine. I'm here today to do an interview with Dale North, a composer who's worked on hit indie titles such as Wizards of Legend and River City Girls. His latest work is on Afterburner Studios' roguelike game Dreamscaper, which is currently available in early access. Dale, why don't we get started by having you tell us how your relationship with Afterburner Studio began?
It was about a year and a half ago, maybe closer to 2 years. I was in San Francisco at the time, and the team is based in San Francisco as well, and they called me because they enjoyed what I did for Wizard of Legend. They told me what they had going, and there was certainly an early playable, but I was in from minute 1. Yeah, it sounded like exactly what I've been wanting to kinda pour myself into.
How would you kind of describe your music and your sound?
I get asked that sometimes, and it's always a hard one for me because I'm consciously always trying to work outside of genre. And not in the cool, I'm a cool, groundbreaking composer kind of way, but like it's more that I grew up trying to imagine what these games were trying to sound like in the earliest forms, right? Usually it's very targeted. It's like we wanted to sound like this or relate to this or here's some references. And as as respectfully as I can, I continue to push back, and now I'm getting more comfortable pushing back farther and farther and farther, and saying, "Hey, why don't we do something that's completely in service of the game and the story we're trying to tell, in the world we're trying to build here, and maybe not so much follow the lines that someone else has already drawn. Let's do something weird. Let's do something different."
What exactly was your impetus for getting into video game soundtracks?
Literally, from putting a video game in a console, I've wanted to do this. If you look at your Nintendo when it's not on, Nintendo Entertainment System, you have to wonder what those little ports for are on the side. And a lot of people went through the process of trying the AV port versus the RF adapter and saying, "Hey, this looks a lot better." But there's also an audio port, and all you need is an RCA splitter, and then you can plug that into a stereo system and record a sound test mode. That was a very, very big thing for me to get a game and record the soundtrack.
Where about in to Dreamscaper where it was Afterburner Studios when you were approached?
It was still very early, and I was living in San Francisco at the time, and that's where the team is based. And they called me over, and I don't know. It was the first time we met, the first day we met, and sitting in their studio. I just started spewing forth these musical ideas, and I remember their faces just looking. This guy is crazy. I think they liked how crazy I was, and I kind of went home with a gig that day.
So Dreamscaper is like a very dreamy game for lack of a better adjective.
There's no better.
If you've played the game, like you know what that means. But yeah, everything about it, from like its kind of like atmosphere to the way like the characters move. Obviously, the soundtrack kind of gives us this very surreal kind of feel to it, even in the waking world. Um, has the game kind of always had that constant dreamlike feel and aura to it? And how has kind of as they developed the game and evolved the game to kind of like, as you said, blossom into something bigger than how it started, how has the music and the soundtrack evolved with it?
This is not my first roguelike, and I love writing music for roguelikes, and I'm working on some new ones as of now. It's a very comfortable place for me, and roguelikes are the coolest. But the one general feeling for them is that they're fast. They move fast, and the music isn't always fast, but it usually is pretty high tempo. My initial pitch to them again on day one was, what if we did roguelike music, but it's actually slow? Actually, let's do 100% of the soundtrack in 6/8 time, which, even if you're not musically inclined, you can kind of get a sense of what that means. It's like, instead of 1, 2, 3, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Another musical concept that I pitched initially was like, let's never have the music resolve. For the most part, I would say 90% of the music doesn't musically resolve. It gives a sense of like being over, but it's never done. And you just have this, with all the techniques put together, you have the sense the music is moving. And certainly when there's combat in a battle state, there's musical tricks involved to never change the tempo, but feel like there's a lot more action and movement. But yeah, it was always dreamy.
When Cassidy, the protagonist for Dreamscaper, when she's kind of feeling a bit more jumbled in life, the music itself gets a bit more jumbled. When she is in the waking world and becoming familiar with her new home and everything, the music is a bit sweeter. I don't think somber is the right word, but like kind of like not as intense. And you know, the music does a very good job of matching Cassidy's, what I assume to be her attitude in given moments, in telling her story. But are there any other ways besides like jumbled music and pacing, how the music tells Cassidy's story?
You know, it's depending on how far you've entered in the game, you definitely feel a sense of the more literal form of music reflecting a mood. But even then, I didn't have as much elbow room as you normally do because I had to stay in the confines of my music design. Right? So one of the things that changes pretty pronounced changes is her apartment. And as the game opens, you see her as a child in a room, and that's kind of a I'm not sure exactly, but I think that's kind of like a foreshadowing of how the game system's going to work. And when you play it, you'll see that it starts out in a room where she's just moved to the city, and the music is definitely sad, you know, but it's not sad in that obvious minor video game soundtrack kind of way. It's more, I want it to sound like maybe you just woke up, or maybe you're about to fall asleep and you're in that kind of hazy mind state. What does that sound like musically when your mood is reflected just a teeny bit in that? And so that's really my approach for a lot of the kind of bigger, more marked musical changes, where when you play the game and you start out that way and you kind of come back and fall asleep and wake up, when you wake up the next time, you're in an apartment and she's established inner city, and Cassidy will, you know, can then go about town, and you definitely feel more of a, I don't want to say vibrance, but there's definitely a little bit more of a warmth. I'm glad you said somber because I really was going for that, even in the most upbeat times, you know. And sweet, I'm glad you used the word as well, because that's exactly what I was going for. So it's this mix of somber and sweet. The goal is to continue to push those combinations in ways that don't necessarily fit together throughout the kind of reveals of her backstory.
Dreamscaper is still in early access, of course, so it's still an evolving game. When you saw the game as it is in its current form, the current builds, what kind of was going through your head when you could finally hear your music in Dreamscaper that way? I know this isn't the first time you've done video game music, but did Dreamscaper feel any different compared to, like, say, Wizards of Legend or any other indie game you've worked on?
The feel is a lot different for me, and that's a lot of that has to do with the amount of power and decision making that they left to me. Most good developers give you as much wiggle room as they can possibly give you, and that's always appreciated. But for them, it was more like I came up with, you know, basically the music's entire concept, and so, you know, it's one of those things where when you pitch something and you manage to sell it, you really got to make it work. And for me to play the game, I, you know, as you know, more final builds were coming down the line, I still wasn't completely sure that it worked in the way that I intended musically. And there was definitely nips and tucks in both the music and in the systems. But a lot of it isn't up to me. It's up to, again, players and how they feel and how they receive it. You know, if I'm going back to the very first thing I said in our conversation, is that, like, one of the greatest things about video music, I believe, is that, like, your interpretation is the correct answer. Like, it's not about me and it's not about my intent so much. I just like any other artist, it's up to me to try to say what I am trying to say in the best way that I can, and hope that you receive it. So in playing the game in its current form, as you mentioned, I was excited. It felt really good, and it's a different feeling than I've ever had from playing a game I've worked on before, because it was like, this was kind of a stretch, and it was really weird to put these systems together. And this definitely is, I mean, for me, it's definitely uncharted territory. But I don't know that this approach has been done in this way on anything that I can think of. I was very happy to see that it felt like it worked, but again, as I'd said just a bit ago, I really didn't know until others started to play it, and that connection seemed to happen. And at the end of the day, that's really my job, is to kind of make that connection.
For listeners and others who come across your work, what is the best way for them to support you?
I mean, playing Dreamscaper is a fantastic way to support, not only myself but the team. We put a lot into it. We have big hopes for it, and man, I don't know that I've written and kind of crafted a soundscape this much for anything that I've worked on. So that's cool. But beyond that, supporting me, I'm not super focused on album sales. But if you want to stream any of my stuff, literally all of it's on Apple Music and Spotify and Google Play and everything.